Speed. Marker, take one.
Okay, so if you can tell me about the agricultural depression.
Well, the agricultural depression, I think, for the farmer started not long after World War II or World War One, because in 1918, 1919, cotton was 40 cents a pound, and it steadily began to decline until the 30s, the 1930, 1931, it went down to 5 cents, 4 cents. But all the time in a declining price market, the farmer was being hurt while the rest of the country was prospering. So he was already in a depression by the time that the Great Depression hit.
Good. And so what was their survival strategy? How did landowners get by?
Well, they just ate more cheaply, and they stayed at home, and they cut their firewood, and so it took very little to live. But that's what.
Last time you also told me about how they had to cut back on their furnishings to sharecroppers. Can you tell me about that again?
Yes. Well, I can't remember the exact figures, but as the price of cotton went down from 40 cents to 4 cents, obviously the amount of advances on a crop had to be curtailed, and so what might have been a year's furnish in 1920 would not have been possible in 1930. So the amount of money that could be lent with the prospect of selling cotton at 5 cents just could not be as much as the advances for a higher price.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell me some about the Twist Farm? You know, how many acres there were, what kind of layout you had, how many sharecropper families, what the houses looked like?
Well, the plantation was about 17,000 acres.
I'm sorry, do you mind saying the Twist Plantation?
The Twist Plantation was 17,000 acres. That would be approximately 25, 26 square miles. This particular farm was really bounded by 2 rivers, and the people who lived there could very well spend their life there and never leave the plantation. I suppose there were people who were born and died on the plantation that never went off the plantation. The plantation was operated under an arrangement of small units. Each unit might be 1,000 acres and would have a unit manager, sometimes called a riding boss. He was a riding boss because he went about his business on a horse every day, and he visited the tenants to see to observe the progress of the crop and to make any advances that were necessary. I'm trying to think of something else to say.
How many sharecroppers and ranchers
Oh, well,
did you have?
There were about 450, 500 families. That would probably make the population around 2,500 to 3,000 people. Each lived in each family had its own house. It would be a small 3-room or a 4-room house, very simply built. The houses were strung out all over the farm so that a family could actually live right on the patch of land that the family was going to work that year. So all they had to do was really walk out the door, and they were in the cotton field. The houses were very simply built. Each had a hand-operated pump in the backyard. There may have been a small pen for hogs or chickens. There may be a small garden. They may operate a small garden for the early part of the summer, but usually by midsummer, the garden's burned up, and that was always a problem.
And can you explain a little bit more about what do you mean that someone could be born and live and die on the plantation without ever leaving?
Well, it was sort of a self-contained economy. He got whatever all his needs tended to on the farm. He had no real good convenient way to go anywhere. He would have to walk or ride a mule, and the nearest town would be 12 miles away. He's not likely to go there, and he's not likely to have any money to spend that he couldn't he could obtain what he needed at the company store.
Last time you were telling me that that most of the renters, or all the renters, were white. Why is that? Why were the renters white for the most part and the sharecroppers black?
Well, most plantation operators much preferred the black sharecropper to the white renter. Usually, the whites were more difficult to get along with. They were more quarrelsome. They would probably be question the price of cotton. They were just more contentious, and I really, most of the plantations did not really want to have any white tenants. Usually, the white tenant would prefer to arrange to have his own mules, his own tools, his own hay, and pay a fourth rent rather than a half rent, and have the landlord furnish all the tools and equipment, all the mules and equipment.
So in contrast to that, how would you describe then a black sharecropper? You were saying they're less quarrelsome. What do you mean? Or can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, I think the black tenant in that day was really had no power, so he just pretty well had to accept whatever the arrangements were, and if he say when it came time to price the cotton, usually the landlord would buy or would settle with the tenant as to his share of the cotton, and then he would send the cotton on over to Memphis and sell it himself. At some point, at a time like that, the white tenant might want to know, well, the price you're giving me, is that the same price that you're going to get in Memphis? He would ask troublesome questions, so he was just a more difficult fella. He maybe resented his position more than because if he felt he was white, he shouldn't be somebody's sharecropper. So I think he felt better if he was a tenant, and I think that he could very well be more resentful of the landlord and the whole arrangement.
Would a black sharecropper ever say, how much money do you get a pound?
He wasn't likely to in the 30s. He just, it didn't do him any good, and he just had to count on being reasonably treated, His only recourse was to move, and if he owed some money, he didn't feel free to move. So really, as the Depression ground down, all the tenants were chronically in debt and couldn't move, had no money to move on, had no place to go if they did move. I think that it came down to a well, scratch that. I don't know what I was going to say.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay. We ran out of film.
Okay, all right.
A roll of film goes for 11 minutes.
Take two, marker.
Okay, if you can tell me about the arithmetic.
Yeah, well, I think that if you imagine the price of cotton at 40 cents in 1919, approximately, right after the World War I, descending to 4, 5, and 4 cents a pound in 1930, you can extrapolate from that a sharecropper, a whole family, maybe five people working, could manage to grow and harvest, say, the cotton that they could raise on 15 acres, maybe 20 acres. If in an average year they could make 15 bales of cotton, and at 4 cents a pound, a 500-pound bale of cotton be worth $20, and that's $300 a year total income for a whole family. Now, I mean, that's not the income to the family. That's the yield from the crop. Then the landlord, who has supplied the land, the mules, all the equipment, and the feed to feed the mules all year, if he takes half of that, you've got the family with $150 annual income. Now, if he's been fed all year at almost any at any cost, he's going to owe more at the end of the year than his cotton is worth. It was a hopeless situation. There was absolutely no way for him to ever climb out of the sharecrop situation. There was no way for him to become a tenant. There was no way. He didn't need to go to town because he had no money to spend when he got there. He was just hoping that the landlord would please keep lending him money over the winter and the next year to have a chance to make more cotton on the hope that he could times would get better. But he was locked in. He was just locked in. There was no way for him to improve his lot. And actually, it was impossible for everybody. Any landlord that owed anything on his land was not likely to be making any profits either. So as the years went on, starting even in 1920, it got worse and worse and worse. Nobody was surviving. The plantations were getting deeper and deeper in debt. The tenants were getting deeper and deeper in debt. And it was the Great Depression itself that was the horrible force. It wasn't. I think that a lot of people might think it was the stinginess or the cruelty of the landlords that made life so terrible. They were caught in the same trap, and they could sense that they were going down. Then if you come, I think the mother of all droughts happened in 1930 or 1931, right at the very worst part of the Depression. The South experienced a terrible, terrible drought. I imagine in that year, the average average yield might have been no more than a fourth or half a bale of cotton to the acre. Now, if that fell in on you and you only had 10 bales of cotton at 4 cents a pound, or $20 a bale, at $200, and $100 would be the sharecropper's cost, he still had to pay the ginning costs. He had to pay the cost of wrapping it and baling it and hauling it to market. There was just no way for him to survive. And so the diet had to be curtailed. People just had to eat on nothing at all.
Can you tell me the story? That was a great answer. Can you tell me the story about people eating the gars?
Yes, one summer, as the drought set in, and the rivers fell, on a spur of the San Francisco River, a collection of these mammoth gars had been trapped in some as the water level fell in the river. A number of these giant gars were trapped in the brambles and the trash of the spur of the river, and were then just floundering in a mud basin and dying. And as the people who had not been able to have any meat for months heard about the gars dying, these big, long, ugly, monstrous things that were 6 and 7 feet long, with hides that were tougher than leather, they would walk out on this mud flat and butcher these gars, and it was a pitiful sight to see some very hungry people eating something they normally would not touch, but it was meat. It was.
Good, thank you. Okay, now people were in debt. They couldn't get out of debt. What if they wanted to leave?
They were too intimidated to leave usually.
I'm sorry, can you say who they were?
Oh, the tenant, the sharecropper, would be chronically in debt. It was impossible to ever pay out. But he would be intimidated to leave. There was sort of the code among farmers, among landlords. Almost any landlord that wanted to be thought well of in the community would not take a tenant from his neighbor's farm. So the tenant who decided he had to leave just had all kinds of problems. He really was unlikely to have any place to go to. He was going to get in the first place, he was intimidated. He was. I'm sure that there was a wide range of intimidations, everything from physical restraint to threats of physical restraint. But he was not free to move, and more than likely, if he had to move, he needed to keep on going out of the area entirely. I think that.
How would they leave? What would a sharecropper do who wanted to leave? How would they manage it?
He'd leave at night.
I'm sorry, do you mind just saying?
If a sharecropper wanted to leave, had to leave, then he would more than likely leave at night. He would just have less resistance to his leaving. He wouldn't have to talk to anybody. He wouldn't have to endure any threats. He would just evaporate in the night.
Do you remember if your grandfather or uncle tried to prevent folks from leaving the twist farm?
Well, I'm sure that they tried their best to to disapprove of it. They might have the unit managers speak very harshly about anyone trying to leave. It might to the extent of threats I don't know about.
Mm-hmm. How do you think your grandfather or uncle would have felt about somebody trying to leave?
Well, they would have felt it was wrong. They would have felt that it was an
Can you
honest.
see who they is? I'm sorry.
Oh, excuse me.
That's all right, no problem.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure the landlord would feel if a tenant wanted to leave, it was wrong of him to want to leave. The money had been lent to him in good faith, and if the tenant left, the landlord would know he would never get his money, and if he permitted a wholesale evacuation, he would.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Can you tell me, the Agricultural Adjustment Act paid folks to plow up some of their crop.
We're going to roll out here, Susan.
Okay.
Stop.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll stop on
All
this
right.
one.
All right.
So what's a gar?
Yeah, it's a alligator gar is the name. It's a fish. They grow in all sizes. You can.
Speed. Mark. Take 3 marker.
Okay, Susan.
Okay, if you can tell me.
There was a fish in the rivers. The alligator gar was such an ugly, tough, inedible fish that people wouldn't eat the gar normally. I remember one summer when the river fell suddenly overnight, and a large number of immense 6 and 7 foot long gars were trapped in a spur of the river, because they couldn't swim out, and were found there in the mud flat of the spur. And people in the 30s were so desperate for food, for meat, that as the story got around that there were these immense, ugly gars lying in that mud flat, dying, that people came from all around and walked out in the mud flat to hack off pieces of these gars, although they would normally not eat that fish. They were so hungry, they were so desperate, that the sight of seeing all these people walking around, competing with each other to find a gar that wasn't dead yet, to cut up, to hack off some of his flesh, to carry home to cook. And it was a pitiful sight to see the people eating the alligator gar.
Can you tell me about your job as a water boy for the Twist Farm and
All
what
right.
you did, how much you got paid?
All right, yes. When I was 10 years old, I spent the summer on my horse. That's really, that was a wonderful time for me. In a way, 10 years old, I could not understand, could not appreciate the poverty, the pain, the hunger of the people. I saw them as all wonderful, friendly, loving, affectionate people who were nice to children, so they were nice to me, and I would get a job every summer. I was paid 50 cents a day to be a water boy. I had my horse. All I wanted to do was ride my horse all day anyhow. And my job would be to take a couple of kegs, water kegs, small enough to hook over the horn of my saddle, and I would go to a nearby hand pump, prime the pump, and fill the 2 kegs with water, hook the kegs over the horn of my saddle, and ride back out to a cotton chopping crew, a crew maybe of 20 or 30 people who were chopping, who were hoeing the cotton in the company crop. And somebody had to bring them water on a regular basis. And I would just walk in, or ride in among the cotton choppers, and they would unhook the keg and have a drink and hook it back. And when all the water was drunk, I would go back to the pump and fill it up and come back again. In that way, I came to know most of the people on the farm. I knew them by their names, and they knew me, and we were good friends. And it was a lovely time for me. I didn't understand at that time how much suffering they were enduring. The depression didn't exist for me except from what I could hear.
Now, you were 10 years old, so did you go to school with the sons and daughters of sharecroppers?
No. Actually, the plantation was large enough to be its own school district. It had only one taxpayer, and that was the plantation. The funds that came into the school district were paid to an adjoining school district to bus the white children into the town to school, and the Twist school district paid a fee for each child to be educated in the nearby town. There was no arrangement for the blacks. There were 1 or 2 school teachers who were not trained not trained. I suppose they were more babysitters than anything else. And there was a school on the plantation for the black children, if and when they came there. But so often they were kept in the field to help the work through the harvest. They didn't go to school. They may go to school sometime during the winter if it wasn't too muddy and too disagreeable to get to the school. In the spring, they went back to the fields to work. So school for the black children on the plantation was pitiful. It was almost non-existent.
How come the disparity? White children were bussed off into a school and black children were left mostly to fend for themselves?
That was just the times. That's the way it was. Black children didn't get to go to school. They certainly didn't go to school with the white children. And the black schools, I'm sure, varied a great deal from the city to the country, but most black children in the country did not get an education, did not become literate.
In terms of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, can you tell me a little bit about the act and also how it was decided how the money would be split up?
When Roosevelt came in, he passed through Congress the Agricultural Adjustment Act, I think in 1933, and it was designed to bring some relief to this dreadful situation in the rural South. One of its principles was to curtail the production of cotton. In that first year, people were paid to plow up some of the cotton. To get the bill through Congress, Roosevelt had to make certain concessions. He thought that any funds paid by the Agricultural Adjustment Act should be paid half to the landlord and half to the tenant. The Southern congressmen were not going to stand for that. They refused to pass a bill on that basis, and they told Mr. Roosevelt that if he insisted on that, he'd get no bill at all, and if he got no bill at all, chaos was going to reign, and if
What did the Southern Democrats, why did they refuse to go along with something that did a 50-50 split?
well, of course, they were responsible to their voters, and that would be the white man. The white people were going to vote them in or out of office. And they could tell Roosevelt, look, you won't get any bill at all unless you design it our way. And here's why you should do it our way. If you insist on half the money going to the tenant, to the sharecropper, then the landlord will just kick them all off and work the cotton as a day crop, as a company crop. And he'll just hire them for work when he wants to hire them, but he won't furnish them for a crop. And you've got a worse situation. So I think, as I understand it, then Roosevelt agreed that 90% of the money would be paid as rent to the landlord, and 10% would be paid to the tenant. Then, by the time the bill was passed in Congress and got down to the county level, the county committees, which were all white, made an addendum that any money paid to the tenant would be paid to the landlord in behalf of the tenant, and could be applied to his debt if there was a debt, rather than to be paid as cash. So it ended up the tenant got no relief in that way. But the Adjustment Act did have this effect. It immediately pushed cotton out of the 4 and 5 cent level to 7 and 8, 9 cent a pound level, so that it did have a tremendous, it brought a tremendous relief to the economy by almost doubling the price of cotton there in a year's time.
Now, last time you said as time went on, there was increasing pressure to give the tenant more of the parity payment. What kind of pressure? Where did that come from? Does that sound familiar?
I don't remember.
Oh, roll out.
Okay, all right. I don't remember it quite that way. Did I say that?
Yeah, that's what I took from the pre-interview, but maybe I got it wrong. That's what I thought.
It might have been in a.
Sorry.
What are we going to talk about now?
The Southern Tenant Farmers Union.
Oh, yeah.
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 Marker, take 4.
Okay.
As to the Southern Tenant Farmers Union,
Sorry, do you mind just saying it all?
the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, I heard about as a boy. I know very little about it. I know that there were efforts to organize the sharecropper. What I could hear from the white people, they were just. It was a horrible idea. It would go nowhere. It was communistic, and it was only going to just make things worse for everybody. I did hear of a race riot down in Elaine, Arkansas, and I think I did hear that one of the founders of the union came from Tyronza, Arkansas, which was not terribly far from our farm. But I didn't know personally anything about the Tenant Farmers Union.
What were they trying to do?
I suppose they were just trying to better the life of the sharecropper. I guess to get a better deal for him, get some kind of by striking, just forcing a better contract for the sharecropper, as far as I know.
Did you ever hear about any of the strikes that they called?
I heard about this some strike down in Elaine, Arkansas, but I didn't know anything about it.
Do you-
Okay.
Oh.
Jet.
I guess before we start up, is there anything else that you can tell me about the union that you can think of?
I really can't.
Okay.
I don't.
What I'm going to ask you to do then next is to describe Earl.
Marker.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Okay.
The nearest town was the town of Earl, Arkansas. It had, I think, about maybe 2,500 people, and half white, half black. It was a small agricultural town. It was about 30 miles from Memphis. It was mainly a cotton ginner's town. There were 3 or 4 cotton gins. The richest people in town would be the people who owned the cotton gins. They would furnish the small farmer, or make advances to the small farmer for his crop, and gin his cotton, and quite often buy his cotton from him there at the gin.
So can you tell me about Paul Peacher, whose nickname I understand was Peaches?
Oh, yes. Well, the town marshal of Earl was an infamous man by the name of Peacher. He, I think in 1935, was convicted in federal court of peonage for operating a farm outside of Earl, where he used people he had arrested and had sentenced in the city court. He would use these people to work his farm outside of town. He was notorious because in the 30s we had so many people who began to hit the roads all across the South. And they were vagabonds. They were hobos. They were beggars. They came to the back doors of the people asking for a meal, asking for some work they might be able to do. And these people were vagrants. They were considered undesirables because I think they threatened the security of the town people. And so their police officers were told to discourage this vagrancy. And the way they discouraged, they just arrested them as soon as they showed up in town. And people like Peacher would arrest them and then see that they were sent up to his farm to work his crop. And as I say, he was later found to be convicted of peonage.
Now, last time we talked a little bit about Peacher, and you said you'd met him a couple of times, and he was okay toward you, but if you had been black, you wouldn't have felt that way.
Oh, yes.
Can you
Yeah.
explain to me Peacher and the difference?
Yes. If you met Peacher on the street, you would think he was a very nice man. He had the most beautiful daughter in town. I remember that. She was 2 or 3 years older than me. But he was a terror on the other side of town, across the railroad tracks. Anytime there was some sort of fracas, disturbance, Peacher would have to go over there and restore peace and quiet. And when he came in the place, he might, with his blackjack, restore tranquility pretty quickly. So he was a terror. He was a terror for the black people of the town. He just demanded immediate obedience. He demanded compliance with his orders, or he would just work them over with a blackjack. And he was a terrible, terrible man.
And on his prison farm, did he have, was it more black than white? Like who?
It was all black, best I remember. It was all black. I don't really believe he had white people on his prison farm, but I'm not sure about that.
Mm-hmm.
But he could be very cruel even to young white vagabonds, people drifting through the town. He could be pretty terrible. There was a story I heard about when, and it wasn't Peacher, but it was another police officer in the same county, stopped a young white boy walking down the highway and told him, asked him where he was going and what was he doing there. And then the boy would answer, the young man, say maybe 20, 25 years old. And this story went around the county that the officer said, I can't hear you, I can't hear your answer. Come in a little closer. And so the boy was required to stick his head inside the window, and the officer just rolled the glass up up under the young man's chin and said, now listen, if you break my glass, it's going to cost you $100, and you're going to have to work it out at 50 cents a day in prison. Now, you just don't you move and break my glass, or that's what's going to happen to you. Then he whips him with his blackjack, with the guy's head caught inside the car. Then, when he gets through, he releases him and he says, now, you tell all your buddies, don't ever come into this county. You pass the word, all you hobos. That's what's going to happen to any of you.
Take 6 marker.
Okay.
I remember my grandfather saying that he knew at the start of the year that he was going to lose $50,000 by the end of the year. He would lose $50,000 more than he'd already lost. The landlords were going broke. $50,000 in those days was a lot of money. He knew that there was no way for him to feed the people and sell from a crop enough to get his money back. He knew that to start with. I remember those remarks were made inside the family. So I think the big misunderstanding, the myth is that the landlords, if they hadn't been so stingy, so cruel, so mean, the sharecroppers would have had a very happy, idyllic life. They could have lived well. It's just not true. Everybody, the Great Depression was destroying the whole rural economy. It was anybody who owned land was going broke. If he had to advance money based on 4 or 5 cent cotton, people could not live on $100 a year. A family could not live on $100 a year. Yet they had to be fed to work the crop another year. So everybody lived on the hope that things would get better. And of course, President Roosevelt did begin to improve the situation in '33. And from then on, the conditions did improve.
Great. Can you tell me the story again about the sheriff from Crittenden County?
There was a story that went around Crittenden County that one of the law enforcement officers.
We rolled out?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well,
We're going to do it again.
you're gonna-
Take 7 marker.
Okay, Susan.
Okay. Sure.
I remember in the '30s, there were large numbers of people traveling the highways, coming from Alabama and Georgia on their way across the South, maybe headed toward California, looking for something, looking for a better life, and maybe the hill farms of Georgia and Alabama were worse off than we were. But as these people passed through looking for work, they were quite often reduced to begging at the back door of the townspeople. This was not wanted in such a place as Crittenden County. I remember a story of one of the enforcement officers in the county stopping a young white man walking along the highway. This story traveled around the whole county, that he beckoned the young man to his car door, asked him what he was doing wandering down the road of Crittenden County. When the young man attempted to answer, he said, "I can't hear what you're saying, come closer." And so he induced the young man to stick his head inside his window. When the young man did that, he rolled the window glass up under the man's chin and then explained to him that if he moved and broke the window glass, it would cost him $100, and he would have to work it out at 50 cents a day on the prison farm. Once he warned the boy that he mustn't move and break the window glass, then he took his blackjack and worked the fella's face over real good. When he finally released him, he told the young man, "Now you get out of this county and you tell all your buddies, all your trifling, vagrant buddies, this is what's going to happen to them if they come back through here." It was a story, I think, attributed to one of the police officers.
Can you tell me about browsing? What is browsing? What are doodling books?
Okay. Sometime, I suppose, around 1930, on our farm, there were coins introduced instead of dollars. These coins were called brozine. They were made, I suppose, of bronze and zinc. I really don't know what, but it was a flat, dull metal. The coins were made good for $1 in merchandise in the company store, or 50 cents or 25 cents, or a nickel. And all payments, all advances were made in these coins. They would spend in the company store, but they wouldn't spend anywhere else. Simultaneously, there was the doodling book, a packet of tickets that a unit manager could fill out in behalf of a tenant who wanted $2 or $4 worth of groceries or medicine or something. The manager he carried these doodling books in his pocket. He would pull out his book and write a ticket to the tenant. The tenant then could go down to the company store and produce the ticket and spend up to the amount of the ticket. So the doodling book and brozine were used concurrently.
Gate marker.
Okay.
Now, sometime around 1930, brozine was introduced as a set of coins to pay for all labor and for all advances on crops. These coins are examples of brozine. This is the dollar. It's good for merchandise in the twist store. It's no good anywhere else. This is the 50-cent coin. This brozine was paid out for all work that took place on the plantation. It was chiefly designed to see that all the money spent in making the crop would be spent back in the company store. Of course, that was the obvious reason. It was defended as a means to protect people from buying frivolous things in the town or in the city, and could buy. This way, they would buy only those things that were necessary to manage to get through the Great Depression. Now, there was a doodlem book that each farm manager carried on his person, and he would write up an order on a copy of this in favor of the tenant, how much he was to be advanced, whether it would be advanced as groceries or cash for buying medicine, and he would tear this off, tear the copy off and give it to the tenant. The tenant then could take it down to the store and take it out in trade as specified by the manager. If the tenant went to the store by himself, he could get nothing. He had to get an okay from the manager, and this was the doodlem book was the means to get the authorization.
Do you have time to ask a question and also Phil?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Let me just ask you one quick question also. You said at some point earlier when we were talking last time that if we were settling up and I asked you to see if I could see the books, that would be an affront. Can you explain that to me?
Yes. It was considered an affront if a tenant asked the landlord to see the books, to see the charges made against him. It was a challenge to the landlord's integrity, and of course there were many wrongs committed by landlords who would doctor the books to see that the amount charged would certainly take care of all that the tenant had coming. There were lots of unsavory stories about that. The interest charged, usually the interest on any advance was an immediate entry on the books of 10%. If the account was paid off a month later, then the interest would be 10% per month. If it paid off in the fall, it would be like interest for the 6 months of the advance. But when the tenant came in to settle on the crop, the 15 bales had been ginned, then he asked the landlord, well, how'd I come out? Well, you came out like this. And he took that announcement as the final fact. There was very little he could do about it. That's why the white tenant was not particularly liked by the landlord, because he'd want to see the books. He'd want to know what did you pay me for my cotton? What's this interest charge? How much is this a year? A lot of things like that made him an unattractive tenant. Then if you made him mad, and then he'd go burn your barn down. So the white tenants were considered barn burners and were not generally desirable tenants because they were not so easily managed.
Great. Okay.
Okay, great. So